Greeting. Peace be with you. In this video I am going to do a speech synthesizer experiment with the XFS5152CE chip using Arduino framework. With the first sketch, I will show how to make use of XFS5152CE to synthesize hard-coded text in the sketch, using the Arduino Uno microcontroller board. Then, I will show how to make use of dumb display as UI for getting arbitrary text from you, even from news headline feed available on the internet. The microcontroller board used for this part is the more powerful ESP32 Dev Kit board, and ESP32's internal Bluetooth will be used for connecting to dumb display. Note that the XFS5152CE board used in this experiment may be different than the one that can easily be found in online shop like Amazon. However, this should not affect much, since in this experiment, only UART is used to control the XFS5152CE chip. Nevertheless, be advised that the board used is a 5 volts board. Other than the 2 pins to connect to a speaker, the XFS5152CE board used in this experiment has 5 pins, the usual VCC and ground pins, TX and RX pins for UART interface, and a pin to control enabling of the speaker, which will be left unconnected in this experiment. To connect the XFS5152CE board to the Arduino Uno, connect 5 volts of Arduino Uno to VCC of XFS5152CE board. Connect a ground pin of Arduino Uno to ground of XFS5152CE board. Connect pin 8 of Arduino Uno to RX of XFS5152CE board. Connect pin 9 of Arduino Uno to TX of XFS5152CE board. For connecting the XFS5152CE board with the ESP32 Dev Kit board, an external 5 volts power supply is also used. Connect 5 volts of external power supply to VCC of XFS5152CE board. Connect ground of external power supply to VCC of XFS5152CE board. Connect ground of external power supply also to a ground pin of ESP32. Connect GPIO 17 of ESP32 to RX of the XFS5152CE board. Connect GPIO 16 of ESP32 to TX of the XFS5152CE board. Now, let's review the first sketch, which simply control XFS5152CE to synthesize hard-coded text of the sketch. The sketch is basically for Arduino Uno, however, it can be run with ESP32 microcontroller board as well. If ESP32 is used, the 5 volts that is needed by the XFS5152CE board can be acquired from the V and pin of the ESP32 microcontroller board. Line 8 of the sketch will be effective if the sketch is compiled for ESP32. The line defines the macro synthesizer to be the object serial2, which is provided by Arduino framework for using UART2 of ESP32 board, the same way as hardware or software serial object. If the sketch is compiled for Arduino Uno, line 16 and 17 declare synthesizer to be a software serial object. In the setup block, line 24 initializes the synthesizer serial object to use baud rate of 115,200. Line 26 declares the text to be synthesized. Note that the annotation H0 hints that the English text that follows should be read out, instead of spelled out. To send synthesize text command to XFS5152CE, line 28 first writes the header byte to the synthesizer serial object. Line 29 and 30 write the size, that is the number of bytes, of the rest of the command packet. Note that the size is a 2-byte integer. Followed, line 31 writes the command byte, with 1 being the command for synthesizing text. Next, line 32 writes the text encoding byte. For ASCII text, can use 0 as the text encoding for the text to synthesize. Finally, line 33 writes out the text to synthesize. That is it. Let's hear it.
Hi. Peace be with you. Jesus loves you. Hi. Peace be with you. Jesus loves you.
The second sketch makes use of dumb display as UI for getting arbitrary text from you, as well as headline news title via REST API available on the internet. Since this sketch is supposed to be run by more powerful ESP32 microcontroller board, hence line 5 simply assumes ESP32 and defines the macro synthesizer to be the serial to object. Line 12 defines the macro news API endpoint. Note that this part requires you to get an API key from newsapi.org and put the key here. Otherwise, the code to get news headline will not work. Line 15 defines the macro image file name, which is the file name for image downloaded for the news headline. Note that in order for Dumb Display app to be able to save image to your phone, you will need to grant permission to Dumb Display app to do so. Select the menu item, Settings, then press the button, Access Images, and grant the permission asked for. By doing so, Dumb Display app can access images in the Dumb Display folder of your phone's internal storage for pictures. Lines 20 and 21 declare the Dumb Display object, using ESP32's internal Bluetooth support to connect it to Dumb Display Android app. Line 26 starts declaring the routine, UTF-8 to Unicode. Since internally, Arduino framework will store string in UTF-8, however, while XFS5152CE supports Unicode text encoding, it is UTF-16, not UTF-8. Hence, this routine is called for to convert UTF-8 text to Unicode bytes. Line 62 starts declaring the routine, synthesize voice, which has used the send command to XFS5152CE to synthesize the text, and Arduino string, passed into the routine. Line 63 first sends the header byte. Lines 64 and 64 declare a byte buffer to store the Unicode text bytes. Line 66 calls the routine, UTF-8 to Unicode, to convert the Arduino string characters into Unicode bytes. Line 67 declares the local variable, outlen, which is 2 more than the number of bytes Unicode bytes. Lines 68 and 69 send the length of the rest of the command package, which is value of the local variable, outlen. Lines 70 and 71 send out the command as well as the text encoding. This time, the text encoding is 3, which means the text encoding is Unicode. Last of the routine, line 72 sends the Unicode text bytes converted from the input text. Line 77 to 80 declares 4 different DD layers for the Dumb Display UI. Langs button is a LCD layer for simulating the language button. News button is a LCD layer for simulating the news button. Text layer is a graphical LCD layer for displaying the text to synthesize. It is also a button, clicking which will allow you to input arbitrary text to synthesize. Image layer is a graphical LCD layer for displaying an image downloaded from a piece of news headline. Line 82 and 83 declare the DD objects form download resources from the Internet. News tunnel is for calling News REST API and get back the returned JSON data. Image tunnel is for downloading image from the Internet and save the image to your phone's internal storage. Lines 86 to 92 declare the routine reset displaying, which is used to reset the UI for displaying new data, and at the same time, visually disable the buttons. Lines 93 to 96 declare the routine enable buttons, visually enable the buttons. In the setup block, line 102 sets up the synthesizer serial object to use baud rate of 115,200. Lines 104 to 107 create and set up the Langs button. Lines 109 to 113 create and set up the News button. Lines 115 to 121 create and set up the text layer. Notice that it has feedback enabled using the flag F: keys, which indicates that feedback should also prompt for text input as well. Lines 123 creates the News tunnel as a JSON tunnel for calling REST API to get news JSON data from the Internet. Since not all JSON data will be needed, filtering criteria is specified, which restrict JSON data got back will have keys containing title or URL to image. Line 124 creates the image tunnel for download image from the Internet. Lines 126 to 130 create and set up the image layer, which is used for showing any image downloaded for a piece of news headline. Lines 132 to 136 instruct to auto-pin the different DOM display layers in the desired way. Line 138 calls the routine enable buttons to make sure the buttons are visually enabled. Lines 143 and 144 declare two global variables. Check millis is for storing the millis when the status of XFS 5152CE is checked, is idle is indicating whether XFS 5152CE is idle, and ready for accepting synthesize command. Line 146 declares the global variable English only for indicating the language selection, either English only or English plus Chinese. Note that the global variable English only is declared as a DD value record object, so that it is easier to keep track of changing of the variable's value. In the loop block, line 149 to 155 check if the global variable English only has changed its value. If so, the appropriate label is shown on the Langs button. Line 157 gets any feedback from the text layer. If feedback is got, line 159 calls the routine reset displaying to indicate that new text to synthesize is to be displayed. Recall that the text layer feedback will prompt user to input text. In case text is acquired, line 161 print the text to the text layer. If XFS 5152CE is idle, line 164 formats the text acquired, and stores it to the local variable text. Note that the annotation V1 adjusts the synthesized volume to the 1 level. H0 annotates that the text that follows should be read out, instead of spelled out. Normally, language of text can easily recognized by the text, and hence, language selection doesn't make much sense. However, in case like when text contains Arabic numbers, language selection is required. Indeed, lines 165 to 169 will base on the value of the variable English only further annotate the formatted text with G1 or G2. Line 170 writes out the formatted text as a comment to DOM display app. Line 171 calls the routine synthesize voice to send the formatted text to XFS 5152CE for text synthesizing. In case XFS 5152CE is not idle, line 173 writes out the comment busy to DOM display app. Line 176 calls the routine enable buttons after handling the text input from the user. Line 179 checks if news button is clicked. If so, line 180 first calls the routine reset displaying, preparing to acquire data from calling news REST API. Line 181 prints out 3 dots to text layer, as a way to indicate that data is being acquired via a relatively slow REST API. Lines 182 to 198 randomize the category of news to acquire. Normally, the country source of news is US. In case the language selection is not English only, lines 199 to 204 randomize the country selection to HK. Based on category and country, line 205 format the ultimate endpoint for calling the new REST API. Line 206 reconnects the news tunnel to call the news REST API to acquire data from it. Lines 207 and 208 declare the two local variables, title and image URL. As long as the news tunnel has not reached end of file, line 209 starts looping in order to acquire returned data from the news REST API. Line 210 check if there is any pending data to be retrieved from the news tunnel. If so, lines 212 to 214 retrieve the data, a key value pair of data. Line 215 to 217 check to see if the data is for title. If so, set the local variable title to the value got. Line 208 to 220 check to see if the data is for image URL. If so, set the local variable image URL to the value got. After all data got, line 223 call the routine reset display again. Line 225 prints out the news title got. Line 227 formats the news title got as text to synthesize. Line 233 call the routine synthesize voice to synthesize the formatted text. In case image URL is acquired, line 236 reconnects the image tunnel to the image URL to download the image and save it to phone's internal storage. Line 237 starts loop waiting for the download to complete. Line 238 poll result from the image tunnel. Lines 239 to 242 checks if the polled result is 1, that is download and save done successfully, draw the download image to image layer. Lines 243 to 245 checks if the polled result is not 0, that is not pending, break out of the loop. Finally, after handling of getting news data, line 248 calls the routine enable buttons to visually enable the buttons for further interaction. Lines 251 to 253 check to see if the Langs button is clicked. If so, toggle the global variable English only. If it has been a while since last checked the status of XFS 5152CE, lines 256 to 260 write out command to XFS 5152CE to check the status. Lines 262 to 265 check if status check response from XFS 5152CE is available. If so, set the global variable is idle accordingly. That is it, let's see it working.
Hello. How are you? $1,234. Apple S14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro now up to $249 off at Amazon 925 points. Apple S14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro now up to $249 off at Amazon 925 points. Simon Biles has just two planned words to describe Michaela Schifrin as haters HubSpot. Stock futures rise after steep sell-off. As tensions mount in Ukraine, the Wall Street Journal. "你好吗？ Omicron 变种病毒。林子博分享和儿子感染 Omicron 经历，全身骨痛高烧，8日靠10退烧药康复。致香港经济日报 Topic 亲子儿童健康，香港经济日报 Topic。每日必看，拿手项目，华丽演出谷爱凌2金，到手萌翻，现场中天新闻，2022-0218中天新闻。